from small grains such as these, a nation is growing. Some few miles off the southeast coast of Asia, at the crossroads of regional and intercontinental travel lanes, lies a sprawling triangle of more than 7,000 islands, the Republic of the Philippines. Set against the blue waters of the Pacific, this mosaic of greens and browns is a beautiful land, endowed with sweeping beaches, fertile plains, and mountainous peaks. Seen from the air, the lush beauty of the islands, together with a gentle tropical climate, make the title Pearl of the Orient seem well deserved. But, like a pearl, the Philippine nation has for many years been hidden beneath a strong shell, the shell of foreign domination. Spanish, American, and Japanese, each in turn ruled these islands, and each left a layer of the heritage and the culture of the people. It was not until 1946 that the Pearl of the Orient finally removed its shell to stand proudly independent and eager to catch up with older, more developed countries. With a land area of about 115,000 square miles and a population of approximately 40 million, the islands can hardly be considered overcrowded. But in recent times, reduced infant mortality and increased life expectancy have added almost 1 million people to the population each year. In order to feed the million new mouths gained every year, rice, the staple food for most Filipinos, has become increasingly important. By using modern agricultural methods, it should be possible for the islands to produce enough to supply all their domestic needs and still leave a surplus for export. But many factors have combined to keep production so low that it is still necessary to import huge amounts of rice each year. Because of this poor production, the farmer and many other people in the rural areas have been unable to share the higher standard of living that industry and commerce have brought to the cities. Some farmers, however, have managed to increase their annual yield and are today producing rich harvests in fields that only a few years ago could barely produce a crop 1/5 of today's size. One such man is this farmer, Filipe. Some years ago, despite many months of constant labor, the meager yield of its harvest was hardly enough to supply his family's basic needs. Poor irrigation methods, not enough fertilizers, and a limited knowledge of modern technology kept his rice productivity low. The small percentage of each crop that seemed to promise some reasonable return for his work was likely to be attacked and damaged by insects and rodents. Also, the rice strains that Filipe could use as seed were often poor, grew weak, and were flattened by the first heavy wind. These conditions made it impossible for Filipe to collect enough money to feed and clothe his family as he wished, and it became necessary for him to borrow. Together with his son, he visited a local merchant who agreed to advance enough cash for his needs. But since he had no collateral, he was forced to accept the moneylender's terms for the loan. The money would have to be repaid at 100% interest, and as security, his next crop would be mortgaged to the merchant. Hoping that his next harvest would leave him enough to repay the loan, Filipe agreed to these terms. The loan had given him the cash he needed to feed and clothe his family. However, he knew that should his next crop fail, he would be thrown deeply into debt. So deeply, in fact, that he would be forced to borrow again to pay the interest on his original loan, and he would once more have to mortgage future crops to cover his debts. It was a situation he had seen lead many other farmers into continual poverty. It was about this time that some members of the Scarborough Foreign Mission Society working in Hinundayan, Philippi's village, became aware that this cycle of never-ending debt was destroying the spirit of the farmers. A group of the mission fathers met to discuss the situation and start the search for a solution. They realized that material aid might solve the immediate problems, but could do nothing to correct the long-term ones. They knew that another, quite different approach was necessary. The people of Hinundayan had to become aware of their own capabilities. They had to learn that they carried within themselves the solutions to their problems. The fathers began by encouraging the townspeople to take the first steps toward a collective effort. They urged the villagers to unite and form their own cooperative credit union. For almost a year, the Scarborough fathers went throughout the village, telling people their plans and getting them to form groups to study the problems in the area. Moneylenders who demanded 10% interest per month, the lack of credit for housing, medical expenses, and education. At first, the people were pessimistic. They believed the fathers' intervention would only make a few people wealthy and greedy as the moneylenders. But the fathers persisted and gained the trust of 26 villagers who stayed, studied, and learned the philosophy and mechanics of the credit union system. Once the initial step had been taken, other members of the community became eager to follow. But it was not enough to be simply willing to invest cash in the union. It was necessary to understand that only a collective effort would make the union work. In order to establish this idea, all members were encouraged to attend lectures designed to counteract many of the negative attitudes revealed by the early study groups. There were still some who believed that other members would cheat them. But an education in the philosophy of credit unions proved to them that this would not be so. Eventually, the people of Hinundayan had their faith and perseverance rewarded. The San Jose Cooperative Credit Union was started. On March 19, 1969, a new building, specially built to house the union, was officially opened by the Bishop of Maasin. The ceremony attracted visitors from many outlying districts. Some came not only to enjoy the spectacle, but also to learn all they could about the cooperative movement and to carry the knowledge back home to develop similar plans for their own areas. As the fathers of the Scarborough Foreign Mission Society watched the villagers proudly explain the workings of the credit union to their visitors, it seemed that the time was near when the mission could consider their contribution was complete, and they could fade out of the picture, leaving the running and administration of the union in the capable hands of the villagers. Some of the women were among the first to help run the union. As members, they were also some of its earliest depositors. Their hard work and obvious faith that the union would be successful encouraged many others to contribute and become regular depositors. Within 5 years, the people of Hinundayan had succeeded in building their union to more than 1,000 members with deposits of over 400,000 pesos. For Felipe, the union was not the magic solution to all his problems, but it helped him cope with the more immediate ones. Now, if he urgently needed cash, he could borrow from the union instead of going to the money lenders. These loans carried reasonable interest rates and could easily be repaid. But more important, after a period of regular contributions, he had saved enough money to pay off his old debts and buy back his land. He was a free man again. This rediscovered freedom restored his self-respect and filled him with new hope. He was sure he could now improve his family's living standards, but to do so, he needed to improve his crops and increase his rice production. Another community project had recently been started by the people of Inundayan, the farmers' cooperative store. It was there that Felipe went to buy the fertilizers he needed for his fields. Not only did the cooperative offer him supplies at reasonable prices, but by being a member, he was also a shareholder and participated in its profits. This store, managed by the villagers, kept prices low by buying its stock in bulk. Thus, the farmers could afford to buy enough fertilizer to enrich the land as they needed. Felipe regained his land, and with it, his independence and self-respect by using the self-determination that had been lying dormant within him. He knew he had not done it alone. Others had worked with him. Other members of the cooperative movement who were equally determined to improve their crops had approached the International Rice Research Institute based near Manila and invited them to send experts to Hinundayan to teach modern rice production methods. The teachers gave lectures which Felipe attended eagerly to learn all he could to improve his crops. The farmers learned up-to-date information on the newest techniques of rice fertilization and irrigation. They were taught modern methods of land use and learned the most recent research on developing better rice strains. Having learned all he could from the lectures, Felipe put his education to good use. That year, instead of planting the usual long-stemmed rice so easily broken by the wind, he decided to try sowing a new variety recently developed by the Rice Research Institute. This was miracle rice, shorter, stronger, and growing closer to the ground. Throughout the months, Felipe worked, watching his crop grow and tending it carefully. He used all his newly acquired knowledge of weed killers and insecticides to protect it from the rodents and insects. The months passed, and eventually it was time to harvest. Many of Felipe's neighbors joined him to help bring in his crop. It soon became apparent to all that the miracle rice was an unqualified success. The short-stemmed rice had grown even better than the farmers had hoped, and Felipe's care and effort had produced a superb crop. Farmers realized that from this new variety of rice, enough seed could be obtained to distribute among themselves. Next season, they would plant it and reap the same abundant harvest. This meant enough rice could now be grown to supply all the villagers' needs and still leave a surplus to be sold outside the village. For the farmers of Inundayan, rice had become a cash crop. This realization spread, and with it, an understanding that now their land could provide better living conditions, improve educational opportunities for their children, and a life filled with dignity. Their rich soil, blessed by the sun and rain, could be the means for them to achieve more than basic survival. Life could now be enjoyed by all. Now that much of the economic burden has been lifted from their shoulders, the villagers can find added meaning in their thanksgiving for a good harvest. But their efforts to gain a higher living standard cannot be the ultimate goal. They know that economic independence is only the first small step in their development as man. Just as the development of the miracle rice allowed the surplus to be shared among the farmers, aiding the economic growth, so the new hope and self-confidence spreading from person to person is bringing about a spiritual growth which will make them masters of their own destinies. We have no desire to remain at the beginning, to create a nation of mere shopkeepers whose thoughts run only to groceries and dividends. We want